last week we began with Deuteronomy chapter 1, and in in that we went over largely the whole chapter. So just to recap, Deuteronomy comes from the Greek word Deuteronomian, sorry, meaning second law. It is a second law, or rather the repetition of the law. So it primarily consists of Moses's farewell speeches to the Israelites before they entered the promised land. We did Joshua before, and Joshua towards the end of Joshua 23 and 24, Joshua gives what many would say was his farewell speech. That's where the famous passage comes about, 24:19, where he says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And we took a test, and that was one of the questions that were on the quiz. It reiterates and explains the laws that were given earlier in the Pentateuch, which is also known as the first 5 books of the Bible, and also emphasizes the importance of covenant faithfulness to God. And that's something that we saw in Joshua that was really a hallmark of Joshua's ministry, of Joshua's leadership, was faithfulness to God, obedience to God. And it is without question that he continues the legacy that Moses puts forth. So we talked about these. I mean, traditionally Moses is considered the author. Some scholars have some debate about the precise origins of the book, but it is widely agreed that Moses is the author of the book of Deuteronomy. And the events take place on the plains of Moab, just east of the Jordan, before the Israelites go into the promised land, which is also known as Canaan. So we sing all these songs about Canaan land. That's representatory of the promised land, which for us would be heaven. That's the symbolism for us in the grace dispensation of time. It also provides a really crucial transition from the wilderness wanderings, the desert years, as I call it, to the conquest of the promised land. So again, the themes, covenant, centralization of worship, love for God, and social justice. These are themes that are within the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy, as I mentioned, it starts over the plains of Moab, east of the Jordan River. And Deuteronomy 1:8, the Lord says, "See, I've set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which I swore to your fathers," right? So we talked about the context being the final address, then the purpose, to remind them of God's covenant and exhort them to be obedient to what God is saying. Then I asked the question, has there ever been a time where you were overwhelmed, yet were afraid to ask for help? And some of you shared some great stories of times where you were overwhelmed, yet at the same time, you were afraid to ask for help, whether it be at work or in a family situation or at church. There are times where you felt overwhelmed and were afraid to ask for help. Moses was not, right? Now they get out of Egypt, and the promise of Abraham, where God promises him that he's going to make him a great nation and that he's going to multiply him. He's going to be like the seas, and his descendants are going to be like the sand on the seashores and the stars in the sky. And that's great. The promise of Abraham is being fulfilled in Israel. But the bad news was the number of people was becoming overwhelming for Moses. There was too many of them. He says, God has multiplied you here, and here you are today as the stars of heaven in the multitude. And this is a reminder that we sometimes have to be careful what we ask for, one. And number two, oftentimes when we have a blessing where God has blessed us with something, there is a burden that is incumbent upon us. There's a burden that comes with this blessing sometimes. If God were to give us everything that we were to desire, there would be some stewardship, there would be some taking care of that we would need to do. And so Moses comes to this point where the people have grown to vast numbers, larger than when he was when they were in Egypt and he led them out of Egypt. They've grown so much, and so uh, Deuteronomy 1 talks about uh, Moses appointing leaders. So what Moses does is he appoints leaders in Deuteronomy 1 verse 9 to 18. Right? He says plain point blank. Moses says, I alone am not able to bear you. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and here you are today as the stars of the heavens. May the Lord, God of your fathers, make you 1,000 times more numerous than you are, and bless you as he promised you. But how can I alone bear your problems and burdens and your complaints? So what the resolution or the solution is to choose wise, understanding, and knowledgeable men from the tribes, right? So to choose men and leaders from different tribes, and these men are going to judge righteously between a man and his brother, right? So they're not people who will show partiality or favoritism, but people who are going to righteously adjudicate and judge uh, the disputes and the issues. So he appoints ministers underneath him to cater and deal with the people directly. So everything doesn't come to Moses. He has ministers who are or leaders and judges who are working with him to serve and cater to the people. And here's one of the first times where we see a structure similar to what we see in our churches today. This is in large sense where it stems from, and Moses institutes leaders underneath him to share the burden of that many people. So we talked a little bit about the spies in Numbers chapter 13. We talked about the spies and the 12 spies rather, and chapter 1 retells this story, right? It tells the story about sending 12 spies to scout Canaan, and the spies, they report the people's rebellion. They report a fearful report saying that the land is great, the fruit is plentiful, but the people are large. We can't do it. And they object and they don't want to take the promised land. And so Moses really outlines their lack of faith, right? You didn't believe God promised you this land. Then you got a bad report about the land and you just believed everything you heard, right? And Moses, where Joshua's encouraging them to obedience, to faithfulness, Moses is reminding them here in his farewell address of their disobedience and their lack of faith in God's promise. And I ask the question to you, to all, have you ever been deceived? Have you ever been led to believe a false story? And we had some great examples there, and I'm not going to go over it. I'm just running through this so we kind of get the gist of what happens, right? So here's the part where I was saying, where I was sharing about, he says, look, you've come through the mountains of the Amorites, which your God is giving you, right? And he said to go up and possess it. And everyone of you came to me and said, let us send men before us and let them search out the land for us and bring back word. So this is the spies. Let the spies go and let them bring back word, right? And they came back. They brought some fruit and the land, the second highlighted portion, the land in their hands and brought it down to us. And they brought word back to us saying, it was a good land which our God is giving us. Nevertheless, you would not go up. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God, and you complained in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he brought us up out of the land of Egypt to deliver us to the hand of the Amorites to destroy us. Where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged hearts. The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And so there were two good spies, and I asked last week, who were the two good spies? Anybody remember? Who the two? There were 10 who were bad and 2 who were good. Can anybody tell me the 2 who were good? You should know at least one of them. At least one of them.
Mute. Joshua and Caleb.
Yeah, there we go. Child shall lead them. Yes, Joshua and Caleb were the two good spies, and it's not ironic that Joshua would be the one who ultimately would lead the children of Israel. So the penalty, what was the penalty for this, right? The penalty of not believing God. When God promises them this land, God tells them that this is the land that I promised to your fathers. It's a beautiful land, it's plentiful. This is my promise, God says to them. And they rebelled. They said, "Oh no, the people in there are too big for us. We can't manage them. We're not going. You must hate us, God, if you want us to go to this land, right? If you expect us to go up against these people, they're going to destroy us. Have you brought us in the wilderness just for us to be destroyed?" This is their attitude towards God. And so God, we talked about obedience and disobedience, and God wasn't pleased. He said, "Surely not one of these men of this evil generation shall see that good land of which I swore to give to your father." So God was angry, and said that they all will not go in there. They will not go into this land. They will not inherit the blessings of God, except for Caleb and Joshua. Other than that, they're gonna die. And he goes on to say, in the next verse, and I think I have it here. He goes on to say, your children, who you will say will be the victims, and have no knowledge of good and evil, they're going to possess it. In other words, it would be reasonable for someone to say, "Oh, well, God, okay, I understand if you're not going to let me make it, but what about my children? Don't punish them." God says, "You know what? Your children, who you will say will be the victims and have nothing to do with this, they will be the ones to possess it." Great idea. But as for you, you're going to wander the desert by the way of the Red Sea. And I always feel these little things in scripture, these little pieces of scripture are so interesting, and they reflect God's sense of humor. I mentioned that last week, because look, which way do they tell the people to wander the desert? By the way of the Red Sea. And what did God do? He parted the Red Sea, right? So they have to walk by a reminder of God's miracle, to remind them of their disobedience. They disobeyed God. They didn't believe his promise. They didn't believe that they could overcome and make it to the promised land. They refused to take the land. And so God says, "You know what? Walk by the way of my miracle. If I parted the Red Sea, if I caused you to walk on dry land, why could I not cause you to overcome these people and take the land that I promised you? I've done all this. Surely I wouldn't leave you." And so I have an imagery of a prison, because they were accepting of the prisons of their mind rather than walking into the destiny that was before them. And so the penalty, I won't go through that. So they ultimately did obey God, and they ultimately would, but I mean, they refused, and they faced difficulty because of the refusal. And so that was Joshua. I mean, that was Deuteronomy chapter 1, and we talked about some of the lessons that we can learn. Is it's okay to ask for help, right? It's okay to ask for help. And asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is actually a sign of wisdom, right? No man is an island on their own. Nobody can do it by themselves, right? And if we have this thing in culture where burning out is like the cool thing to do, right? If I burn out, or if I work hard and overwhelm myself, then I'm showing to be strong. I can manage, I can take it. Don't worry, don't help me. I'm strong, I'm perfect, I'm invincible. The reality is we're human, and asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maturity. It's a sign that you recognize the frailty of human nature. Humanity is frail. Humanity is not strong, and we are not meant to live life alone. We need to ask for help. 2, godly leadership. We see the importance of these men who Moses assigned, and he assigned them so that they could resolve disputes with justice. And remembering of God's faithfulness, right? God was faithful to the children of Israel. And the fourth bullet there is we see, in spite of his faithfulness, they did not believe, and they were disobedient, and consequently there was a penalty for their disobedience, right? There was a generation that would not see the promised land because of their disobedience. So it is important that we remember and that we trust in God and his promise. Any questions? No questions? No? Okay. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 2. So Deuteronomy chapter 2. So Israelites, as in what I call the desert years, they spent a 40-year journey in the wilderness, and they were, guided by God's command, and we see their relationship with God and how they respond throughout this journey. And Moses, he goes over how God instructed them to sometimes steer clear of conflict, sometimes engage in conflict. It really emphasizes God's sovereignty, his complete sovereignty over Israel and the nations that surrounded them. So some of the key themes are sovereignty, boundaries. We're going to talk about that. God's provision and sustenance, divine judgment and conquest, the conquering of land, the taking over of territory, the fear of the Lord, and obedience and faithfulness. So first, the Israelites, they traveled from the Red Sea towards a hill country called Mount Seir for many days. And so Deuteronomy 2, chapter 1 begins with, then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness. Which way? The way of the Red Sea, right? This is the way that they were told to go, right? And you can see the Red Sea's down here. You can see my mouse, the Red Sea's down here. So they were told to go by way of the Red Sea. And the Lord spoke to me saying, you have skirted this mountain long enough, turn northwards. So these verses really highlight how God's controlling the timing and direction. They spend time going around the mountain, and God speaks and they move, right? So this is God's sovereignty, meaning his complete control over Israel and their direction, and in his time, right? They move in his time. They don't move on their own accord. They move when God says, okay, you've circled this mountain long enough. Now is the time to turn. So a question for you today. Have you ever had to set boundaries? Has there ever been a time where you had to set some clear boundaries, whether it be for people at work, maybe it's people in your family, or maybe it's friends, but times where you had to set boundaries?
Yeah, I had to. It's for work purposes. Um, I think it was during COVID when I think we had to do this whole check-in thing at work to make sure you got that green check mark thing on your cell phone, and or if you wanted, when you get into work, you can do it on your designated laptop or desktop. So I told myself, you know what, like I don't want any association with like my workplace on my personal device. So I denied that and said, like, no, I don't want anything associated with work to be on my personal device. So my boundary was more of like, I'm going to keep work life, and home life. So even now, like even to gain access into your personal device at work, you're supposed to go through some sort of authentication with your cell phone. And I said, no, I'm not having nothing of my personal information be associated with work, be associated with me. So I just use an alternative way of authenticating myself at work. So that was my boundary. Like, I don't want anything interfering with my personal life and with work.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's a good boundary to set up, to kind of set a barrier between work and family. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can add to Monique's with work. Um, so because my job's remote, I don't really get to unplug because I'm always home and I'm working from home. So, and if I'm home, I check my emails and do whatever. So when I first got this job back in 2019, I never unplugged. I was always like responding to emails at like late at night because we have guys on site that work at night. So office is during the day and our labor work was at night. So I would be responsible for if these guys needed money on their company credit card, they would just email me or shoot me a text and be like, hey, I just need some funds on the card.
Mm-hmm. And
And because I'm home and I'm not doing anything, I would do it. So I think it was 2023, we doubled our workload. We got more clients. So it was like really busy. And I literally like I had no time to breathe. So I had to try and like, you know, kind of slow, you know what I mean? Like kind of fade it out slowly kind of thing. And then when 2024 came, January, well, we do reviews at the end of the year. And then January, so I do payroll. So I see everybody's like raises and stuff like that. I didn't get a raise. So my workload had doubled. I was still working all hours and they didn't give me a raise, which is a slap in my face because I'm seeing everybody else is getting a raise and some people shouldn't have got it. So I let everybody know my phone will be on do not disturb from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. So you will not catch me at 8:59 a.m. or 5:01 p.m. And that's that. I told my boss, I told the president, I told upper management, I told the field guys, I told everybody. I was like, if you need me, it's between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. That's it. If the store is on fire, call the fire department, not me. I don't care.
I'm sure you would help if you had like a bucket of water and you're right beside the building. I'm sure you would.
Yeah, if I was beside the building, but since I don't have to be, I mean, it's not my problem.
Okay, good. That's good. That's good. That's good. I think those are both good examples, and especially when it comes to work and your family, sometimes you need to, right, set up boundaries. And each one of us, although we didn't share, have boundaries or should set boundaries in a particular way, right? Whether it's with your family, with work, as was discussed, with your church time or your prayer time. We should set up boundaries. And what boundaries do is boundaries protect, right? Boundaries protect you from, um, they protect you from enemies. They protect you from um, confusion. They protect you from heartache. And, when you especially have a direction in your life, when you have a purpose in your life, for your life, like we all do, boundaries protect your focus, right? So that's one thing I'd love for all of us to take through. Hey, Tate, hey, T, thank you for joining. Good to see you. You're on camera, so I owe you a candy because you're on camera. Anybody who's on camera gets a candy, so welcome. That's Tia too. You're both on camera, so I owe both of you guys a candy.
Yes, I heard candy.
Yeah, so I gave a speech about being on camera and the respect that you show for the session by being on camera. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you guys for coming on camera and being visible. Thank you.
No
Thank
problem.
you. I'll expect it on church on Sunday.
Yeah,
Mm.
it will
I'll
be
move
there.
now.
Tell me
Okay.
tell me the kind of candy. It'll be there. It'll be there.
Okay.
Just nothing too not like Ferrero Rocher. Keep it at like Skittles or.
Okay. No problem. No problem.
Okay. Okay, let's move on. So boundaries, right? Boundaries are important. They help to protect our focus. They help to protect and maintain and sustain the vision, especially when God has called us to a particular thing. it's important that we set up boundaries to surround that, right? And talked about you're not gonna get me between 5 p.m. and 8:59 a.m. the next morning. I'm unavailable. I'm available between 9 to 5, right? So she set up a boundary around her personal time. So boundaries are important, right? And not only setting boundaries is important, but respecting people's boundaries are important. Sometimes when people have boundaries, it causes offense, it causes frustration to other people, but boundaries are extremely healthy. Boundaries are extremely healthy to have and to respect, right? To respect the boundaries, because when you when you see someone has boundaries and you respect that, you're doing a good service to them, right? And you're showing that, hey, I respect you. I know that this thing bothers you. I respect that that's a boundary for you, right? And you can't force your way into somebody's space. Sometimes we try to do that. We force our way into someone's space. We say, I know he doesn't like that, but I don't care. Oh, I don't know she doesn't like that, but I don't care. And so, God is teaching the children of Israel boundaries, right? So he says, in four verses 4 to 8, Deuteronomy 2 verses 4 to 8, he instructs the Israelites not to provoke the descendants of Esau. So as he's given the children of Esau this particular land, and he says, hey, there's land, in other words, there's land that you're going to conquer. There's territory that you're going to have, just not this land. You're not going to have this land, right? And so the scripture says, verse number 4, and command the people, saying, you are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. They're going to fear you. Therefore, watch yourself carefully. Meaning, like, don't beat your chest. It's not the time to show how strong and big and powerful you are. Be careful around them. Don't meddle with them. I'm not going to give you this territory. This is not yours. What is that? Boundary. There's a lot for you to possess, not this, right? I've given them to Esau as a possession. You're going to buy food from them with money. In other words, he's telling them, you're not going to take from them. You're going to use your money out of your pocket. You're going to buy food from them. And you're going to buy water from them with the money that you drink. Don't touch nothing. Don't take nothing. And you're going to buy whatever that is in the land. And so now they're traveling through the wilderness. Their journey starts. God is showing them the boundaries. Respect this territory. Capture this territory. And in the midst of these boundary setting, he provides for them. We see the theme of provision in the wilderness, right? You don't need to take from them. You don't need to steal from them. Why? For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He knows you're trudging through this great wilderness for these 40 years, and your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. All things we should remember, and I've created a walk. Number 1, God will bless. God will bless you. He will bless you. Number 2, God will bless your efforts. If you are in alignment with the will of God and you are willfully putting in effort, God will bless your efforts. He's not going to just bless, he's going to bless your efforts. Faith without work is, someone finish that?
Dead.
Dead, right? So God is going to bless. God is more importantly going to bless your efforts. It's not just going to fall out of the ceiling and land into your lap, right? It's not manna. The days of manna ceased from after Joshua. No more manna. Nothing else is falling from the sky, right? No more provisions are dropping out of the sky. Manna's over. So God will bless your efforts, and God will bless your efforts through the wilderness. So this is why oftentimes, even when I'm sharing, I encourage people to continue to fight, to continue to try. Don't give up. Don't quit, because God is going to bless your efforts in challenging times. God, if you're faithful to him, you commit your ways to him, even through the wilderness, God is going to bless your efforts. We see that in the scripture, right? God blessed you in all of the work, right? The first sentence, God will bless your efforts. It says, for the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. What is that? Effort. In all your effort, right? He knows that you've been going through the wilderness, right? So God will bless your effort through the wilderness. He knows that you've been in the wilderness all this time and you've lacked nothing. And so I want us to receive that today. Now, another theme in this scripture is conflict. I'm curious, and there should be a lot because I'm sure we're not all perfect people who live peaceably all the time with everybody. Have you ever had to avoid conflict? I'd love to hear a story, a good one, on maybe a time where you had to avoid conflict. I can give you one. I remember being at work some time ago, and we were in a meeting, in a particular meeting, and I've shared this story before with some folks, but we were in a particular meeting, and out of nowhere, this person just began screaming and becoming like belligerent with me. I asked for a particular report that his team was going to prepare, and he started screaming and yelling and going crazy to the point where he was like banging on the desk and hitting himself, screaming, angry. And I simply responded like this. I said, this meeting is over. And I put my hand on the desk and I said, this meeting's over. And afterwards, some of the folks that were with me said, you're a better person than me because I wouldn't have responded that way. And if I engaged in that, it would have just escalated to the point where, it would not have been good, right? So I'm curious, is there a time where you knew you had to avoid conflict? Like I knew I had to avoid that. I could not engage at all because it wasn't this person. It was the enemy trying to lure me off of my focus, off of who I am as a person. And he tried to set out the bait. I'm not going to tell you that I didn't want to answer him, and it was easy, but I knew at that point it was the enemy, right? And so once I recognized that, it was easy to make the right decision. So have you ever had to avoid conflict? Anybody? Or do you just tell them off when you got to tell them off? Nobody? Okay, well, in Deuteronomy 2:8-9, again, God is telling them to avoid conflict. God is telling them, don't harass Moab, don't fight them, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession. Why? Because I gave it to to the descendants of Lot. Anybody familiar with that name?
Abraham.
Yeah, Abraham and his nephew Lot, right? And so God is saying now, don't get into conflict with them. You're going to go through their land, through their territory. Don't fight with them. I'm not going to give you this land. You fight with them, I'm not going to give it to you. It belongs to them. Don't fight. Avoid the conflict, right? What is happening here? And you brought up Abraham. That's awesome because that's exactly what Abraham did with Lot. Abraham and Lot, right? There's a story of Abraham and his nephew who were traveling together, and they accumulated a lot of wealth, a lot of livestock, so much so that the land couldn't support both of their growing families and herdsmen. So it led to dispute between some of Abraham's people and Lot's people, and there was the conflict that was growing as they were competing for this land amongst each other. And Abraham, he sees the potential for further conflict. And as children of God, we should always be keeping an eye open for the potential of further conflict. And so Abraham sees this and he says, you know what? this land is big enough for the both of us, and we're family. So how about this? Take your choice of any section of the land, and we'll separate. You can take whatever land, I'll take the other half. Now, he doesn't say, oh, I'm going to go first. And watch this. Who was God's promise given to? Abraham or Lot?
Abraham.
Abraham. Yet Abraham says, you know what, Lot? You go first. You choose. What am I learning from that? Well, Abraham is willing to take the lower seat for the sake of peace. Abraham is willing to say, it's mine. Like, think of the humility here. He's willing to take the lesser seat for the sake of peace. What if we live life like that? What if how many of us would say, no, God promised it to me, so you're lucky you get half? How many of us would say that? But Abraham says, you know what? You choose. We're family. There doesn't make sense that there's conflict. I want to avoid conflict. So take your choice of any of the land you want, and I'll go my other way. And Lot, being Lot, he chooses the luscious, greenest, most fruitful part of the plains near a valley called Sodom. And then he separates and he goes there, right? So after Lot's departure, God reaffirms his promise to Abraham, saying, hey, I'm going to give you all I'm going to give you everything. And I'm going to give this to you and to your descendants. And so God reestablishes Abraham, almost saying, you're not losing anything here, right? He recognizes what he's done and reaffirms his promise. And so this scenario of avoiding conflict really serves as an example of what we should do, is that we should compromise where possible on things that are not a matter of our salvation or sin, or integrity. We should compromise where possible rather than doing it through contention and competition, right? Because so often scenarios like this happen, right? I've seen people become contentious over the chair they sit in at church. Well, that's my chair, right? Or, little small trivial things we become contentious over. Well, Abraham and Lot, Abraham was promised the full unadulterated blessings of God. They get to the land and he's willing to let his nephew choose the other half because there was contention. So a lot to learn from avoiding conflict. Any questions on that? Or feeling, thoughts?
So are you saying in a sense, I am on mute. Are you saying in a sense that as Christians, we should be more, I guess, self-aware, and because in being more self-aware, then we can probably see clearly and maybe spot the conflict a mile away and then just kind of prevent it from really becoming a conflict?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Absolutely. And I think the more aware you are of these things, is the better decisions you'll be able to make, right? Because you'll recognize this is becoming a problem. So I need to either address this issue or I need to find a way to resolve it, right? And we're going to get into the next point. The next slide is a perfect example of this, right? Because verse 9 to 19, God is telling them, avoid conflict. Avoid conflicts with Moab, avoid conflicts with the Ammonites, or with Lot's descendants. Avoid conflict. Then verse 24, he says, okay, begin to possess the land, engage in battle. Right? So sometimes, and I wrote this quote here that came to me. Sometimes you have to fight, other times you have to live to fight another day. Learning the difference is essential, right? So obedience is everything. Obeying God is everything. Sometimes you got to fight, you got to engage. Other times you got to know when to disengage. You got to know this is not the time, right? Conflict, I got to resolve it at all costs, up to giving away half of my territory. That's what Abraham recognized. He could have fought. He could have said, "This is my stuff. No, not giving it to you. We will go to war and to battle because this is my promise. This is what God gave to me." But he recognized something here. And he said, "You know what? Let's not fight. You take this, I'll take that. Where you can compromise, you should. Right? Where you cannot compromise, you should fight for it. If that makes sense. Like let's look at Jesus's life for an example. Jesus was willing to give himself to death. Right? They accused him of blasphemy, claiming that he was God and he was fully God, and he did not fight. He went to death. However, when people were compromising the church, he was turning tables over and driving the money changers out. So, I mean, there's a time to turn tables over, and there's a time to disengage and be humble, even to the cross. And this is what Jesus' life shows us as well. And Lot is a good example, right? There's a time to fulfill and subdue and conquer kingdoms, and there's a time to say, you know what? You pick first. Take the lush green grass, and I'll take whatever's remaining. So learning the difference between when to engage, when to fight, and learning the difference between when to disengage. That is super key to life, right? David was excellent at this. He would always go, God, should I pursue them or should I not? Will I be victorious or will I not? And that's how we should live our lives. And I had some great advice from somebody who advised me of the same, you know, when there's obstacles that arise in your life, consult God and ensure that you're obedient to what his voice is saying to you in your life. And it concludes with the Israelites defeating the king after God encourages them to engage into battle, demonstrating God's faithfulness on delivering his promise. Any questions, comments, anything at all?
I mean, I think it's kind of, it's interesting that sometimes in Abraham and Lot's situation, that in order to be the bigger person, you have to take or accept less. Because maybe Abraham probably saw that, you know what, eventually this is going to become a thing, and he's aware of probably his own nephew's like character, and he knows that, before it gets to that point, let him even think he's winning. That's even the bigger thing. Let him think, oh, okay, you took the luscious part, you got that part. He probably thought, okay, yeah, score, not knowing where he was really off to.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of different things in that.
Yeah.